The architect's ledger, covenant of the soil. The ledger and the silent war. This was no ordinary battle fought on open ground. It was a war waged in silence, buried deep within the gene sequence of seeds, and hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten federal records. Most people believed their food was controlled by farmers. They were partially correct. But the essential truth, the one my great-grandfather had fought for, was that our food was ultimately controlled by those who wrote the laws, held the patents, and determined what qualified as history. When you inherit a system of checks and balances designed to fight global monopolies, protecting that system becomes the only ethical choice. My name is Arjun Sharma, and I was, until recently, a historical records consultant for the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. In Washington, D.C., outsiders assumed my job was tedious, a dusty pursuit of forgotten paperwork. They were wrong. These papers weren't just old. They were the last remaining line of defense against a $500 billion agribusiness industry determined to achieve total control. My world was defined by Annex 7. It was the oldest, most labyrinthine wing of the USDA's National Agricultural Library. Built hastily in the aftermath of the 1930s Dust Bowl, it was specifically designed to house and safeguard the nation's original data, rare soil samples, and conservation blueprints. Annex 7 was a bunker, separate from the sleek, modern USDA headquarters, perpetually smelling of dry earth, aged paper, and quiet defiance. My small, windowless office, set between thick, pre-war limestone blocks, was a sanctuary. I wasn't just looking for data here, I was looking for the covenant, the silent promise the US government made to its farmers after the land had literally blown away. That sanctuary shattered the day Deputy Undersecretary Eleanor Vance walked through its ironclad doors. Like the HOA president from my great-grandfather's stories, Vance possessed an arrogance born of unchecked authority and expensive tailoring. She immediately deemed Annex 7 an architectural and bureaucratic eyesore, a relic that had no place in the USDA's digitized future. Vance was the public face of Project Clean Slate. Ostensibly, it was an initiative for data modernization and efficiency. In reality, it was a covert operation to achieve data erasure. Vance's true allegiance, and the source of her enormous political capital, lay with AgriGenesis Global, the world's foremost agribusiness megacorp. AgriGenesis's entire business model relied on monoculture and genetic uniformity, where every seed planted carried their proprietary patent. Every rare soil report, every original seed variety documented within Annex 7, was a direct, molecular threat to their monopoly. I kept Vance's official memorandum pinned to my corkboard, a physical reminder of the ticking clock. It declared, the Conservation Annex, Annex 7, must be fully decommissioned and prepared for structural demolition within 90 days. All non-digitized, non-essential physical records are to be incinerated. Her definition of non-essential was chillingly precise. It encompassed virtually every record pertaining to Dust Bowl recovery and local conservation efforts between 1933 and 1945. This was the metaphorical bulldozer aimed straight at my family's legacy. I knew that complying meant incinerating not just a building, but the foundational legal principles that shielded independent farming. I had exactly 90 days. My investigation began in the deepest, least visited section of Annex 7, the architect's vault. This was where the most sensitive, original agreements, the silent covenants between the federal government and individual farmers, were stored. It was the physical embodiment of the commitment that farmers would practice stewardship, and the government would guarantee their sovereignty. One frigid November evening, as the silence of Annex 7 was broken only by the whirring of the climate control systems and the rustling of my search, I reached the farthest corner of the vault. I was methodically pulling out antiquated steel filing cabinets when my fingers brushed against a loose limestone block in the wall. As a civil engineer trained to spot structural anomalies, I knew the walls were solid. This loose block was not a flaw, it was a deliberate secret. It was the keystone to a hidden door. Using a small pry bar, I carefully worked the block loose. It came free with a soft, grinding whisper. Behind it lay a small, seed-sized cavity, coated in a thick layer of fine gray dust. Holding my breath, I reached into the void. My hand closed around a stout, oddly shaped object wrapped in aged, brittle leather. I pulled it out. It was not a standard government file. It was a thick, hand-stitched leather book, meticulously crafted. In faded gold lettering on the cover, written in an elegant, antique script, were the words, "The Architect's Ledger, Protocol of the Soil, 1934. The name immediately resonated with the fragmented family law I'd inherited, the story of the engineer who stood up for the small farmer against DC's burgeoning bureaucracy. This ledger was a coded message, finally delivered after 80 years of silence. I cracked it open. The first page bore a distinctive signature, Samuel Morrison. The same Samuel Morrison who had built the stone bridge Linda Prescott had bulldozed. This ledger was the intellectual twin of that physical structure. But the ledger wasn't an accounting book. It contained vast, beautifully rendered legal diagrams and the original land preservation treaties from the Dust Bowl era. And within those pages was a section titled, underlined multiple times in red ink, the Perpetual Seed Covenant. This wasn't merely a conservation law. It was a contractual promise, designed to grant every farmer absolute sovereignty over their land and their harvest's lineage, a legal mechanism with the power to instantly nullify AgriGenesis Global's proprietary seed patents and intellectual property claims. It was the legal equivalent of a depth charge aimed at the megacorp's entire foundation. In that dusty Annex 7, I grasped the profound reality. I wasn't just fighting to save records. I was holding the nuclear deterrent that could vaporize a multi-billion-dollar empire. And Eleanor Vance, who was scheduled to lock down the annex tomorrow morning, had absolutely no idea this ledger existed. A surge of cold adrenaline hit me. Who was the architect? And why had he hidden this here? I knew this ledger, like my great-grandfather's bridge, was the key to winning this silent war. But before I could turn another page, a faint beep sounded from the service entrance at the back of the annex. The security alarm. Someone was inside. I was alone, with the architect's ledger, in a building slated for incineration. I had to find a hiding place and get this ledger out. I quickly tucked the thick ledger inside my jacket, pushed the stone block back into place, and smeared fresh dust over the seam. The security alert was clearer now. This wasn't a routine guard. This was the unmistakable sound of Vance's private inspection team, often deployed after hours to discreetly remove sensitive data for Project Clean Slate. I sprinted down the silent, shadowed corridors of Annex 7. I knew the building intimately. There was only one unmonitored exit, the relic of the 1934 freight elevator shaft. The lift itself had been condemned for decades, but the emergency stairs within were still viable. I wrenched open the small, groaning metal door to the shaft and slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me. I was swallowed by the shaft's absolute darkness. From above, I heard the heavy, purposeful tread of boots. Annex 7 clear? We can't afford to find anything in here that could compromise the project. I heard Vance's voice echo. Just dust and debris, madam. Bulldozers are scheduled for the morning, the security chief confirmed. I moved fast, taking the stairs down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the hard cover of the ledger pressed against my chest. If they found me here, the ledger and my career would both become casualties of the demolition. Bursting out onto the ground floor, I made a dash through the loading bay and into the dark expanse of the rear parking lot. I started my car. In the rearview mirror, I saw Vance and her chief looking up at the annex. The building they believed was full of neutralized secrets. I knew their conviction was absolute. But I also knew they were wrong. Pressed against my seat was the architect's ledger. The war had just begun. And to win it, I needed to understand every clause, every diagram, and every single seed secret hidden within its pages. This was not just a fight to save a structure. This was a fight for the sovereignty of the world's food supply. The Covenant's complexity and the freeze-out. The roar of the engine was the only thing muffling the frantic thoughts racing through Arjun's mind. He drove out of DC towards his trusted former mentor, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a retired agricultural law professor known for her radical views on seed sovereignty and her encyclopedic knowledge of 1930s federal land statutes. Evelyn lived in a secluded cabin on the edge of the Shenandoah National Park, a place where digital surveillance was almost impossible. When he reached her cabin, The only light came from a single oil lamp. Arjun spilled the entire story, the demolition notice, Eleanor Vance, AgriGenesis Global, and the near-fatal escape from Annex 7. Evelyn listened, her face grim, but a spark of pure, academic excitement ignited in her eyes when Arjun placed the architect's ledger on her rough-hewn wooden table. Samuel Morrison. I knew he was real, Evelyn whispered, running a reverent hand over the aged leather. They erased him from the standard USDA history books. He was a brilliant engineer who realized the greatest threat to farming wasn't nature, but the consolidation of power. For the next 72 hours, Arjun and Evelyn lived and breathed the ledger. The document was a masterpiece of legal engineering, blending common law with agricultural science. Morrison, the architect, had foreseen the rise of corporate seed monopolies. Decoding the Perpetual Seed Covenant. The central section, the Perpetual Seed Covenant, was the most crucial. It stated that any land that had received federal conservation aid following the Dust Bowl was bound by an irrevocable, non-transferable easement. This wasn't a standard zoning easement. It was a genetic heritage easement, GHE. The key legal loophole was threefold. The definition of stewardship. The GHE mandated that stewardship included preserving regional genetic diversity within the soil. This meant a farmer could not legally plant a monoculture that actively diminished the native soil biome. The chain of custody clause, it legally defined seed ownership not as the seed itself, but as the genealogy of the seed stored within the USDA's original 1934-45 seed bank, i.e., the record still sitting in Annex 7. Morrison had created a legal chain of custody that predated all modern seed patents. The automatic breach provision. If a farming entity, AgriGenesis, for example, used its proprietary seeds to sue an independent farmer who was trying to cultivate native varieties, the very act of suing was defined as an automatic breach of the GHE on their entire operation, potentially invalidating all their land contracts and existing patents tied to those properties. Arjun, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. Morrison didn't just write a law. He built a trap. AgriGenesis's entire empire is built on acquiring land and forcing their patented seeds on it. If even one farmer, in one jurisdiction, files a countersuit citing this GHE, it opens the floodgates. Their patents become meaningless, their contracts nullified. This isn't just about saving Annex 7. This is about breaking the back of global agribusiness. The corporate counterattack. While they were decoding the covenant, the bureaucratic backlash began. Arjun's phone had been silent for 3 days, but when he finally turned it on, it immediately jammed with notifications. The first message was an official, encrypted email from the USDA. Subject: Immediate and Irrevocable Access Revocation. T.O. Arjun Sharma. Effective immediately, your consultant status and access to all USDA property, digital networks, and archives, including Annex 7, have been terminated pending the outcome of an internal investigation into unauthorized removal of federal property and gross misconduct. A hold has been placed on all outstanding payments and benefits. Do not attempt to contact any USDA personnel. The internal investigation was a flimsy facade for Vance's paranoia. She must have realized the ledger was gone after the security check. Vance, knowing she couldn't legally acknowledge the existence of the ledger, had launched a full-scale freeze-out to destroy Arjun's credibility and resources. The retaliation was swift and crippling. Financial isolation. Arjun's access to his bank accounts was flagged as under review by a corporate compliance firm that, upon quick research, was a subsidiary of AgriGenesis Global's legal department. His savings were frozen. Digital eradication. His USDA consulting profile was wiped. All his years of research, memos, and digital notes vanished. He was a ghost in the system. Physical threat. Evelyn's cabin, usually remote and peaceful, received a visit from 2 men in dark suits driving a black, unmarked sedan. They weren't federal agents. They were too clean, too silent, and their license plates were intentionally blurred in the security footage Evelyn had wisely installed. They were AgriGenesis's private corporate security. They aren't just trying to stop you, Arjun, Evelyn stated, watching the grainy surveillance footage. They're trying to starve you, bankrupt you, and silence you before you can even find a lawyer who will touch this case. The first key, the forgotten jurisdiction. Arjun realized that he couldn't fight Vance in D.C. The system was rigged. He needed to find the weak point, the first legal domino that could fall. He returned to the ledger, focusing on the marginalia written in Morrison's spidery handwriting. Morrison had included a list of the first 5 regional jurisdictions where the GHE was officially filed and recognized by local courts, before D.C. central bureaucracy could consolidate power. The first location on the list was underlined repeatedly: Lubbock County, Texas. The heart of the original Dust Bowl. Morrison's accompanying note read, "The first fight must be fought where the dust first settled." Their local courts still hold the true, original decree, untouched by the subsequent federal amendments that sought to neuter our work. AgriGenesis was powerful, but they relied on federal centralization. They had forgotten the local, decentralized strength of the original covenant filings. Lubbock County is AgriGenesis's North American seed testing capital, Arjun explained to Evelyn, his voice regaining its determined edge. They have thousands of acres there, all patented, all monoculture. If the Lubbock County Courthouse still has the original 1935 GHE decree on file, then every single AgriGenesis patent operating on that land is in automatic breach. The fight had shifted from the dusty archives of D.C. to the scorched earth of West Texas. Arjun was penniless, digitally erased, and hunted by a global corporation, but he held the literal key to their destruction in his hands. "I need to go to Texas, Evelyn," Arjun declared, standing up. "I need to find the first farmer who still remembers the covenant. I need to find the original GHE filing in the Lubbock courthouse before Vance realizes where the real power of this ledger lies." Evelyn smiled, a proud, sharp light in her eyes. "Good. You stop fighting the bully on her turf, and you go to the place where the law still respects the land. But remember, Arjun, AgriGenesis controls Texas agriculture. They will be watching every courthouse, every library, and every stranger who asks the wrong questions about old dust." The stakes were now personal, legal, and geographic. Arjun had the ledger, but he had lost everything else. His journey to the Texas Panhandle, armed with a hidden 80-year-old law, was about to begin. The dusty trap and the archivist ally. Arjun abandoned his car 100 miles outside D.C., trading the digital footprint of major transit for the anonymity of cache and forgotten bus routes. His expertise as a historian became his tradecraft. He knew that bureaucracy only monitored high-level transactions and digital trails. They rarely tracked analog movement. He carried only the ledger, a cheap flip phone for emergency communication with Evelyn, and a duffel bag of layered clothing. He was fighting a corporate war using the tactics of the Cold War. The arrival in monoculture country. Lubbock County, Texas, was a testament to AgriGenesis Global's dominance. The landscape was a vast, terrifying ocean of agricultural uniformity. Mile after mile, the fields stretched out, identical plants, identical rows, all optimized for patented seeds and satellite tracking. There was no room for deviation, and certainly no room for the regional genetic diversity mandated by the ledger. The atmosphere in the town was heavy, not with dust, but with fear. The local farmers Arjun tried to question were polite but distant, their eyes darting nervously toward the large, imposing AgriGenesis regional headquarters that overlooked the highway. "You asking about old seeds, son?" one older gentleman asked, his voice low. "That's how you get your land taken. Just stick to what they tell you to plant." Arjun realized that Vance hadn't just secured the federal level. AgriGenesis had engineered a state of localized compliance through fear, lawsuits, and financial dependence. He couldn't trust anyone who lived under the AgriGenesis shadow. His first stop had to be the Lubbock County Courthouse. But he knew he couldn't waltz in asking for a classified 1935 legal decree. He needed a discreet entry point. The Historical Society Gambit. Arjun drove to the quiet Lubbock County Historical Society, an unassuming brick building tucked away downtown. He wasn't looking for the GHE here. He was looking for the historian's network, someone who still cared about the truth behind the official narrative. He found Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed archivist in her late 20s, running the tiny, underfunded library. Maria's family had farmed cotton in this county for generations before losing their land during the last major agricultural downturn. She had a deep, silent resentment for the corporate system that had swallowed her heritage. Arjun approached her cautiously, not mentioning the USDA or the LEDGER, but asking about Dust Bowl-era community land trusts, a close cousin of the Covenant. Maria was immediately suspicious. "Those files are sealed. Proprietary information," she stated flatly, echoing the corporate line she had been forced to adopt. "They're sealed because they prove the land has more rights than the corporation," Arjun countered, dropping his voice. He took a risk, subtly showing her the corner of the ledger he had hidden in his jacket. This document was written by the man who built the original protection system, Samuel Morrison. Maria's skepticism broke. She hadn't seen the ledger, but she had seen references to Morrison's early work in the oldest, most ignored documents in her archive. "Morrison was a ghost story they used to scare the lawyers," she whispered. "If this is real, we don't have time for the Historical Society. We need the courthouse subbasement." The courthouse dead end. Maria's local knowledge proved invaluable. She guided Arjun not to the digital public records, but to a hidden access door leading to the courthouse's physical archive subbasement. This damp, forgotten space housed decades of paper records deemed too cumbersome for digitization, the perfect place for an 80-year-old decree. They found the correct section: Deeds, Easements, and Land Decrees, 1934 to 1936. Arjun's heart pounded as he reached for the index card for the genetic heritage easement. It was gone. In its place was a freshly printed withdrawal slip, dated 3 days prior. The recipient name was redacted, but the agency code was unmistakable: USDA Project Clean Slate Compliance, authorized by E. Vance. "She knew," Arjun hissed, slamming his fist onto a nearby binder. "Vance knew the ledger pointed here. She didn't destroy the federal copy, she preemptively secured the local filing. Now we have nothing to fight with." Maria, however, had been studying the original, handwritten land titles on the surrounding shelves. "Wait, look at this. The original deeds from 1935 aren't just stamped recorded. They have this peculiar extra stamp." The ledger, which Arjun pulled out quickly, was the key. Morrison's elaborate diagrams detailed a two-step filing process for maximum legal redundancy. The decree wasn't just recorded at the courthouse. The original, stamped, and signed physical filing was legally required to be housed off-site with the appointed custodian of genetic heritage for the region. Morrison's note in the ledger, cross-referenced with the deed's peculiar stamp, revealed the location: the Texas A&M Agronomy Substation, Site Beta 7. A high-security, off-limits research facility owned by a university that, ironically, was heavily sponsored by AgriGenesis. First contact and escape. "It's a storage facility," Maria explained, her face pale. "It holds old soil samples and dormant seeds. It's impenetrable. AgriGenesis practically funds the entire department." As they climbed the stairs out of the subbasement, Arjun glanced out the small, upper window and saw it: the black, unmarked sedan from Evelyn's cabin footage. It was idling directly across the street. Vance hadn't just frozen him. She had put spotters in every high-value location, waiting for him to make a predictable move. "We have company," Arjun muttered, pushing Maria back down the stairs. "Corporate security. They are here to recover the ledger." Cornered in the damp basement, Arjun remembered Morrison's notes on the building's HVAC infrastructure, the forgotten blueprints he had studied years ago in Annex 7. Every old federal building had a maintenance escape route. "Through here." Arjun grabbed a rusty metal ladder leading up to a ventilation duct. "It leads to the city sewer overflow, but it's the only way out without meeting them." Maria hesitated for a moment. Then, seeing the steely resolve in Arjun's eyes and sensing the lethal intent of the men now pounding on the main sub-basement door, she climbed. They clambered through the narrow, dusty ductwork, emerging into the fetid darkness of the sewer overflow system minutes later. The ledger, wrapped tightly in plastic wrap Maria kept for archives, was safe. They were now physically in the shadows, but their objective was clearer and infinitely more dangerous: infiltrate a corporate-controlled agricultural research station to retrieve the single document that could dismantle AgriGenesis Global. They're not playing games, Arjun, Maria gasped, wiping the grime from her face. Site Beta 7 is practically a fortress. How do we get in? Arjun looked at the ledger, the leather smelling faintly of saw and dust. The architect always built an emergency exit, he replied, a grim smile forming. We just need to find the old blueprints for Site Beta 7. They won't be in any university database. The Engineer's Folly and the Beta 7 infiltration. Arjun and Maria emerged from the grimy saw system, their clothes stained but their purpose cemented. They had evaded the corporate shadows once, but now they had a clear, highly dangerous objective, Texas A&M Agronomy Substation, Site Beta 7, the fortress housing the original Genetic Heritage Easement, GHE. Locating the lost blueprints. The biggest obstacle wasn't the guards or the fences, but the blueprints. Site Beta 7, built in 1947, was a joint project between the USDA and the university. AgriGenesis had funded its modernization, replacing all digital and public records. They won't be in the university archives, Maria confirmed. AgriGenesis controls the digital domain. We need something analog, something forgotten. Arjun pulled out the ledger and flipped to Samuel Morrison's final handwritten entry, dated 1946. Beta 7 is a fine structure, but the university insisted on the new hydraulic filtration system. I protested. These systems are prone to thermal runaway if the tertiary pressure release is inhibited. I retained the original structural schematics, which are far more honest than the revised plans, and sent them to the one place bureaucracy never checks, the USDA Rural Development Field Office, Archive of Decommissioned Infrastructure. Decommissioned infrastructure, Arjun repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. That's not an archive, it's a forgotten storage shed 20 miles from here, used for old plows and broken tractors. Using Maria's truck, they found the dilapidated shed. Inside, amidst dust and ancient farm equipment, they located a heavy, moth-eaten canvas tube. Unfurling the scroll revealed the original, hand-drawn blueprints for Site Beta 7. They were beautiful, detailed, and utterly unforgiving of the revised, digitized corporate plans. The Engineer's Folly. The blueprints confirmed Arjun's theory. Morrison, the architect, had incorporated a deliberate weakness into the building, an engineer's folly, a necessary flaw in the system that only someone with his knowledge, or the ledger, could exploit. The building housed a massive cryogenic seed vault at its core. To maintain the sub-zero temperatures, it relied on a complex, closed-loop hydraulic cooling system. The revised plans showed modern failsafes. But Morrison's original plans highlighted a crucial detail in the tertiary cooling loop, a manually operated pressure relief valve, PRV, hidden in a crawlspace under the old receiving dock. The new computerized system is designed to trigger a slow shutdown if pressure builds, Arjun explained, tracing the line on the blueprint. But if we manually disable the PRV, the system will assume the emergency release is open, even as pressure climbs. The goal wasn't to destroy the vault, but to trigger a level 3 system lockdown. If we inhibit the PRV, the internal pressure will spike within 30 minutes. The main computer won't know why, so it will initiate a forced, emergency shutdown, all digital locks default to manual override, all power rerouted to the main cooling unit, and the external sensor grid goes offline for the duration of the thermal stabilization protocol. How long is the duration? Maria asked, her voice tight. 60 minutes. 1 hour of pure, analog vulnerability. That's our window. Surveillance and reconnaissance. Over the next 2 days, Maria used her local connections to gather critical intelligence about Site Beta 7, posing as a freelance agricultural journalist. Security, AgriGenesis used a layered defense, an outer perimeter fence with pressure sensors, digital, easily spoofed during a power failure, and an inner ring of thermal cameras focused on the main vault door, vulnerable to the thermal lockdown. The guard rotation. The facility only used 3 guards per shift, and the shift change was precisely at 2 a.m., leaving a 15-minute gap in the patrol pattern where the receiving dock was momentarily unmonitored. The ledger's location. Maria confirmed the GHE decree wasn't in the seed vault, but in the executive records room, guarded by a modern biometric scanner. The plan was set: infiltrate, exploit the engineer's folly to trigger the lockdown, and retrieve the ledger's key counterpart. The infiltration, 2 a.m. Arjun and Maria approached Site Beta 7 at 1:45 a.m., hidden by a heavy utility fog rolling in from the irrigated fields. At 2 a.m. sharp, the guard shift changed. Phase 1, the access point. They reached the abandoned receiving dock. Using the ledger's diagrams, Arjun found the access panel to the hydraulic crawlspace. It was sealed with a rusted bolt. Maria, an expert with farm equipment repairs, used a specialized ratchet to silently snap the bolt. They slipped into the cramped, dark space. Phase 2, the folly is triggered. Arjun navigated the hot, noisy pipes until he located the manual pressure relief valve. It was a massive, hand-operated steel wheel. He disabled the tertiary line as planned. A low, whining sound started deep within the facility as the pressure began its controlled ascent. They quickly retreated and waited outside the main complex as the hydraulic pressure reached its critical point. Phase 3, lockdown. Exactly 27 minutes after disabling the valve, the entire facility plunged into darkness. The massive external security lights died. Then, a low, blaring, non-verbal alarm, the sound of the thermal stabilization protocol, began to wail. The digital gate locks clicked open, defaulting to manual override. The thermal cameras on the inner ring, the eyes of the corporate security, were now black screens, temporarily disabled to reroute power to the main cooling unit. We have 60 minutes, Maria. The executive records room is 2 floors up, past the cryovault, Arjun instructed, pulling the ledger from his pack. He pointed to a small, hand-drawn map tucked inside the ledger. Morrison included a contingency for the biometrics. He knew digital security would fail, but physical access would remain guarded. Phase 4, the biometric bypass. The ledger revealed that Morrison had installed a purely mechanical lock override in case of a total power failure, a hidden keypad disguised as a fire alarm panel adjacent to the biometric scanner. This panel accepted only one passcode, the original USDA Federal Code for the Conservation Act of 1935. They reached the records room. The biometric scanner was useless, dark. Arjun found the fire alarm panel, used a thin tool to pop off the cover, and revealed the mechanical keypad beneath. He knew the code by heart. It was the filing number for the GHE found in the ledger's introduction, 33-7 GHE. He pressed the numbers. With a heavy, gratifying clunk, the executive records room door unlocked. Arjun pulled the ledger from his jacket. Maria, the GHE decree. It's the only original physical copy that matters. Inside the room, amidst modern financial reports and seed patents, they found an ancient, leather-bound portfolio. Maria opened it, revealing a thick, yellowed parchment with dozens of signatures, sealed with an enormous red wax seal. The original genetic heritage easement, Lubbock County, 1935. They had the weapon. But as they turned to leave, the silence of the thermal alarm was suddenly replaced by a sharp, clear voice echoing through the emergency speakers. Mr. Sharma, you should have known that a true engineer always installs a failsafe for the failsafe. Welcome to Site Beta 7. You've given us exactly what we came for. Eleanor Vance was in the building. The 60-minute window had just snapped shut. The countertrap and the first shot. Eleanor Vance's voice, amplified by the emergency speakers, was cold and triumphant, a calculated sound of control. The architect's ledger, Mr. Sharma, is useless without its counterpart. Thank you for collecting both documents for us. Now, drop the parchment and surrender. Arjun didn't hesitate. Vance was playing a power game, but she had underestimated the architect's true genius. The GHE wasn't a weapon for defense, but a mechanism for instantaneous offense. The failsafe. No, Vance, Arjun shouted back, his voice echoing in the dark corridor. The ledger had a warning. It said the new hydraulic pumps you installed in the 80s have a high-pressure failure point at exactly 32 psi above protocol maximum. Your emergency lockdown protocol only triggers a slow pressure reduction. But if you try to override the manual PRV block from Central Command, the system won't stabilize, it will spike. Vance's voice cracked with sudden alarm. Don't touch the override. That's a catastrophic failure point. It already failed, Vance, Arjun said, pointing the ledger at the ceiling. Morrison designed the entire cooling system, including the conduits and the roof anchors, to require the 1934-era manual pressure release system. When you digitized, you removed the original copper conduits and replaced them with plastic-lined pipes. If that pressure spikes, it won't just shut down the system, it will rupture the main lines and flood the cryovault ceiling. Vance was trapped. If she didn't hit the emergency override, the AgriGenesis security team would reach Arjun and Maria within minutes. If she did hit the override, the catastrophic spike would destroy the cryogenic seed vault, the single most valuable physical asset AgriGenesis stored at Beta 7, holding the genetic backup of all their proprietary seeds. Evacuate the perimeter. Vance screamed into her comms. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. The corporate security guards, now halfway up the stairs, stopped dead. The destruction of the seed vault was an extinction-level event for AgriGenesis. Arjun had leveraged the threat of physical property damage to buy himself minutes of life. The escape via the emergency seed chute. Go! Now! Arjun grabbed Maria, and they sprinted back towards the cryovault. Arjun flipped through the ledger's environmental schematics. Morrison had included an emergency seed evacuation chute, a small, insulated tube designed to safely drop valuable seed samples from the cryovault to an external collection point during a fire or structural collapse. It was hidden behind a rusted wall panel in the vault antechamber. They reached the antechamber. As Arjun yanked the panel off, revealing the narrow chute, the lights flickered back on. The 60-minute stabilization protocol was ending. They'll be on us in 30 seconds. Maria cried, stuffing the fragile GHE parchment inside a durable, archival plastic tube. I know, Arjun said, strapping the ledger to his chest. We're leaving something behind. Quickly, he broke the seal on one of the AgriGenesis corporate seed storage lockers. He grabbed a handful of their highly patented, genetically uniform seeds and scattered them into the exposed hydraulic rupture point he had created earlier. Why? The Perpetual Seed Covenant stipulated that genetic heritage easement laws were immediately engaged upon evidence of willful destruction of regional genetic diversity, using patented crops on GHE-bound land. By introducing their patented seeds into the vulnerable, GHE-registered soil of the Beta 7 property, and allowing them to be contaminated, destroyed by the water rupture, Arjun was not only contaminating their valuable seeds, but also creating the physical evidence required to invoke the breach clause. It's not just an escape, Arjun told Maria as he slid into the chute. It's the evidence. Maria followed, and they slid down the dark, steep tunnel, emerging behind a remote, heavily overgrown water tower a quarter-mile outside the facility. The first shot fired. They drove non-stop to a dilapidated motel far from Lubbock, where Evelyn was waiting. She had secured a burner phone and temporary legal assistance from an old university colleague known only as the Badger, a lawyer specializing in obscure federal litigation. Arjun handed the ledger and the GHE parchment to Evelyn. The physical evidence of the breach is back at Beta 7. The legal framework is here. Evelyn's hands shook as she held the documents. This is it, Arjun. We file the injunction now. Using the cover of the Badger's firm, they launched a lawsuit in Lubbock County Court, not against AgriGenesis Global, but against the USDA itself, citing violation of the 1935 Conservation Act by attempting to incinerate the foundational records, Annex 7. Failure to uphold the Genetic Heritage Easement, GHE, by allowing AgriGenesis patents to supersede the original land use decree in Lubbock County. This was the masterstroke. By suing the USDA, they forced Eleanor Vance to defend the GHE in a local court, the very jurisdiction Morrison had protected. Vance's public defiance. Within an hour of the filing, the news hit the D.C. agricultural press. Vance held an emergency press conference. She was visibly furious, her corporate mask slipping. This frivolous lawsuit is an attack by a disgruntled former consultant, Vance declared, maintaining the lie. The alleged genetic heritage easement is a myth, an obsolete reference, and the idea that it supersedes modern seed patents is absurd. We will move to dismiss the suit within 24 hours. AgriGenesis Global and the USDA will not allow our vital food programs to be hijacked by conspiracy theories. But Arjun and Evelyn weren't worried about the dismissal. They just needed the lawsuit to stay alive long enough to serve the discovery request. The discovery request, meticulously crafted by the Badger using the Ledger's exact legal terminology, wasn't for documents. It was for something physical, something Vance couldn't redact or delete. Formal request for discovery of the original soil samples and associated phenotype data, as mandated by the 1935 GHE, currently stored in Annex 7, Vault 14B. Vance had ordered Annex 7 demolished, assuming the documents were the key. She had forgotten about the physical evidence, the thousands of soil and seed samples dating back to the Dust Bowl, each one tied by the GHE to the concept of regional genetic diversity. If the soil samples were intact, they would prove that the land historically supported the diversity the GHE required. If they were destroyed, incinerated as per her memo, it proved Vance was in clear breach of the USDA's own charter. Arjun had just found the Achilles heel in the demolition order. He had forced Vance to protect the very archive she wanted to destroy. The legal battle had officially begun. The legal siege and the final codes. The filing of the injunction immediately stopped the Annex 7 demolition, but it opened a new front in the war, the legal siege. Eleanor Vance, desperate to dismiss the case before discovery, deployed AgriGenesis's entire legal division, Atlas Legal, led by the merciless counsel, Ms. Julianne Thorne. The race to preserve Annex 7. Vance's strategy was simple. Bury the Badger in motions and delays, while simultaneously using a loophole to decommission the annex. Her team argued that while the court had blocked demolition, it had not blocked decommissioning, the removal of the structural foundation and utility connections. The building would become an unstable husk, making the requested soil samples virtually impossible to retrieve. They're trying to collapse the building from the inside out, the Badger explained during a frantic video call with Arjun and Evelyn. If the building is legally unsafe, the discovery request is void. We have 24 hours before they cut the main structural supports. Arjun knew the building better than anyone. He pulled out Morrison's original ledger, studying the Annex 7 blueprints once more. The foundation is anchored by a pre-war emergency ballast system. It's manual. It's the building's last line of defense. This ballast system, designed to protect the vaults from massive Dust Bowl winds, had a series of massive, hand-crank stabilizers deep beneath the subbasement. If activated, they would lock the structure down for weeks, preventing any utility work. Arjun and Maria had to get back into the building he had just escaped. They covertly returned to DC late that night, using the abandoned freight elevator shaft, their escape route from Section 1, they re-entered the dark, silent Annex 7. They found Vance's crew already at work in the subbasement, preparing to sever the main electrical conduits and structural supports. Arjun and Maria had to move fast. They located the access panel for the ballast system, hidden beneath a century-old coal chute. They opened it, revealing the heavy, dusty, hand-cranked mechanism. The two of them worked furiously, the crank groaning in protest. As the final structural lock engaged, the building gave a shuddering thunk, the sound of 80-year-old steel taking its final, protective stance. They heard the frantic shouts of Vance's decommissioning crew as their equipment suddenly lost power and stability. They escaped just before security swept the subbasement. Annex 7 was now legally and physically locked down. The soil samples, the physical proof, were safe for now. The legal showdown, Thorne versus the Badger. The action shifted to the Texas courtroom for the dismissal hearing. Ms. Thorne, AgriGenesis's lead counsel, was lethal, articulate, ruthless, and armed with decades of corporate legal victories. Your Honor, Thorne began, this entire action rests on a single, obsolete document, the so-called genetic heritage easement, which has been defunct since the 1950s. We move for immediate dismissal on the grounds that the plaintiff's claim is speculative, based on fabricated historical documents, and poses a direct threat to global food stability. The Badger fought back, citing the ledger and the legal concept of prior tenure, the idea that the GHE, being filed before the subsequent federal amendments that weakened it, still held superior tenure in the local jurisdiction. The judge was hesitant. "Counsel, I am prepared to allow discovery, but only if the plaintiff can provide verifiable evidence that this GHE document is not defunct. It requires more than just an old seal." This was the moment. Arjun had been waiting for this exact challenge. He glanced at Evelyn, who gave a small, firm nod. The final secret, the biometric signature. Arjun passed a note to the badger, who then addressed the court. "Your Honor, the plaintiff can prove the GHE's current legal status." The architect, Samuel Morrison, foresaw that future bureaucrats might dismiss his work. He encoded a biometric signature into the document itself. Thorne scoffed. "Biometric signatures in 1935? This is ludicrous, Your Honor. They are wasting the court's time." "Not a digital biometric, Ms. Thorne," Arjun whispered to the badger. "A chemical biometric." The badger continued, "The perpetual seed covenant contains a microscopic amount of a rare, naturally occurring plant protein from the original, protected seed strain of this region, a strain that AgriGenesis has since declared extinct. Morrison infused the wax seal of the GHE with this protein. If that protein is still chemically active, it proves the document's validity and its direct link to the genetic material it was designed to protect." Arjun had found this secret written in the final, most heavily coded pages of the ledger. Morrison's final message was a legal failsafe. If they deny the paper, make them test the life within the paper. The judge, intrigued by the sheer audacity of the claim, ordered a 3-day recess for an independent, court-appointed agricultural chemist to test the wax seal on the GHE parchment retrieved from Site Beta 7. Vance's last desperate move. Vance, realizing the catastrophic potential, made her last desperate play. If the test confirmed the chemical signature, the GHE would be deemed valid, and the legal siege would be lost. She had to eliminate the source, the architect's ledger. Within hours, a news article was released, widely circulated through AgriGenesis-funded networks. "Wanted, for domestic terrorism and theft of federal property." Former USDA consultant Arjun Sharma is officially declared a fugitive for the theft of sensitive historical documents, including the architect's ledger, which sources claim contains codes for disabling federal infrastructure. Vance had escalated the bureaucratic fight into a federal manhunt, branding Arjun a terrorist. Her goal was to force Arjun and Evelyn to abandon the GHE and focus purely on their personal safety. The pressure was immense. Evelyn and Arjun were forced to move again, constantly looking over their shoulders. But the chemical test was underway. They knew the protein, protected by Morrison's foresight, would be there. "It doesn't matter what they call you, Arjun," Evelyn said, hiding the ledger one last time. "If that GHE comes back positive, we move straight to the final attack. We need to deploy the ultimate contingency, the Farmers Collective." Arjun looked at the ledger, now more than just a book, but a declaration of war. He knew the chemical test would pass. The ledger's final pages detailed the network Morrison had built, a collective of independent farmers, each holding a fragment of the original GHE contract, ready to file their own lawsuits simultaneously once the GHE's validity was confirmed. The final battle wasn't against Vance or Thorne. It was against the centralized system. And that battle would be won by decentralizing the fight across 1,000 different jurisdictions. The rupture of monoculture. The 3-day recess felt like a lifetime. Arjun, Maria, and Evelyn monitored the news from a secure, undisclosed location, tracking every movement by Vance's federal task force and AgriGenesis's private security. Arjun was now the most wanted fugitive in the agricultural sector, but his focus remained solely on the chemical test results. The verdict: the covenant is valid. On the morning of the verdict, the Lubbock County Courthouse was swarmed with national media. As the court convened, the judge called the independent chemist to the stand. "Dr. Patel," the judge asked sternly, "did you find any evidence of the protein signature claimed by the plaintiff in the wax seal of the 1935 genetic heritage easement?" Dr. Patel, an impeccably neutral figure, confirmed, "Yes, Your Honor." We detected trace amounts of the specific protein, Pseudonostoc texacis, a naturally occurring genetic marker in the native cottonseed of this region, declared extinct since the late 1960s. The protein is remarkably preserved within the wax, establishing an undeniable, immutable chemical link between the physical document and the native genetic material it was intended to protect. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Ms. Thorne, AgriGenesis's counsel, was on her feet instantly. Objection. This is a forensic curiosity, not a legal precedent. Objection overruled, counsel, the judge declared, slamming his gavel. The court accepts the chemical signature as proof of the document's prior legal tenure and its current, valid status as a genetic heritage easement within this jurisdiction. The motion to dismiss is denied. The courtroom erupted. The GHE was real. It was active. It superseded every agrigenesis land use contract and seed patent in Lubbock County that violated its core principle of regional genetic diversity. The final assault, decentralization. Arjun and Evelyn had been waiting for this moment. They immediately initiated the Farmers Collective Protocol, the final contingency Morrison had encoded in the ledger. The ledger contained a meticulously organized list of 200 independent family farms across 5 different states, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado, all of which had received the original 1935 GHE filing. Each of these families held a different, fragmented piece of the covenant, unaware of its true collective power. Evelyn, the Badger, and Maria, working with a network of pro bono law students, contacted the 200 farmers simultaneously. The message was simple. Your land is legally protected. File the GHE breach notice. Within the next 48 hours, 200 injunctions were filed in 200 different county courthouses, from the Panhandle to the Plains. Each filing cited the Lubbock County chemical verdict and declared AgriGenesis to be an automatic breach of the genetic heritage easement on all corresponding land. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Legal paralysis. AgriGenesis was now fighting 200 lawsuits in jurisdictions where their federal influence was minimal, draining their legal resources instantly. Patent nullification. The injunctions froze the proprietary status of all AgriGenesis seeds planted on GHE-bound land, effectively nullifying their most valuable patents in the region. Stock market collapse. The financial market reacted violently. AgriGenesis Global stock plummeted as its entire North American land use model collapsed overnight. Their investors realized that their proprietary seeds were now legally worthless on the very land they were forced to occupy. The showdown at the annex. While the legal collapse was underway, Eleanor Vance, seeing her career and her corporation's future evaporate, made a desperate, final stand. She flew back to D.C. and ordered a full, paramilitary-style breach of the ballast-locked Annex 7, intending to incinerate the original soil samples and physical ledger before the court could seize them. Arjun, having anticipated this, had already made his final move. He had entrusted the ledger to Evelyn and had returned to Annex 7-1 last time. As Vance's security team began cutting through the steel support beams, Arjun was deep inside the archive. He wasn't there to fight, he was there to fulfill Morrison's final directive: if the system fails, activate the disclosure protocol. The disclosure protocol was the ledger's ultimate failsafe. It led Arjun to the main historical exhibit hall in the modern USDA building, the very structure Vance called home. Hidden behind a fake bronze plaque honoring modern agricultural efficiency, Arjun found a large, antique master switch. The ledger contained the exact wiring diagram. This switch was connected to the old, pre-war electrical grid that still powered the USDA's main public address system and the giant LED screen that displayed daily news in the lobby. As Vance burst into the locked Annex 7 sub-basement, searching frantically for the soil samples, the main power in the USDA headquarters flickered, and the giant LED screen in the lobby, the heart of Vance's sleek, corporate image, flickered to life. Arjun threw the master switch. The LED screen displayed a high-resolution scan of the original, red wax-sealed genetic heritage easement. And over the USDA's main public address system, broadcasted live to every desk, every press member, and every federal employee, a high-quality audio recording began to play. It was a secret recording Arjun had made during his escape in Section 5. Eleanor Vance's frantic, desperate voice, screaming. Don't touch the override. That's a catastrophic failure point. The seed vault will rupture. I repeat, do not engage. This was the final blow. The recording proved she not only knew the GHE existed, as she desperately tried to protect the physical seed vault, but that she had actively lied to the court about the nature of the Annex 7 demolition. Within minutes, the building was swarming with internal affairs and federal marshals, not for Arjun, but for Vance. She was apprehended inside the unstable Annex 7 sub-basement, surrounded by the very dust and records she had tried to destroy. Epilogue and legacy. Arjun, now cleared of all charges, stood watching the news reports alongside Evelyn and Maria. AgriGenesis Global was facing a total restructuring. The 200 injunctions forced them to sell off billions of dollars in land and patents, reverting the agricultural rights to the local farmers and reinstating the GHE as a primary legal constraint on industrialized farming. Annex 7 was saved. It was not demolished, but officially declared a National Agricultural Heritage Site, a tribute to Samuel Morrison, the architect. Arjun, however, didn't return to D.C. He, Evelyn, and Maria established a foundation using the GHE as its legal cornerstone. Their mission, to systematically challenge every corporate patent and practice that violated the covenant of the soil, ensuring that the farmer, not the corporation, held the right to the seed. The war had ended, not with an explosion, but with the quiet, decentralized power of a forgotten promise, ensuring that the land, like the old stone bridge, would stand forever.